Julia Roberts. Before she was a household name, Julia Roberts was just a girl from Smyrna, Georgia, born into a family so intertwined with history that Mrs. Coretta Scott King helped pay her hospital bill. That detail alone tells you something about the kind of life she was destined to live. In 1990, she walked onto screens as Vivian Ward in Pretty Woman, and the world simply fell in love. That smile, wide, wild, completely disarming, made audiences forget they were watching a movie. She wasn't performing, she was just being. By the end of the decade, she had ruled romantic comedies, delivered powerhouse drama in Erin Brockovich, and became the first actress to command a $20 million salary. But behind the laughter, her personal life was chaotic. Broken engagements, a short-lived marriage to Lyle Lovett, our tabloid headlines chasing her everywhere. She eventually found peace. A quiet marriage, 3 children, a life carefully shielded from cameras. In 2026, she walked the Golden Globes red carpet, radiant at 58, proving some stars don't fade, they just glow differently. Monica Bellucci. There's a word in Italian, bellezza, and no one has embodied it quite like Monica Bellucci. Born in a small Umbrian town, she never planned to act. She was studying law when a modeling contract pulled her into the spotlight, and soon the world couldn't look away. By the time she played Milena in 2000, a woman whose extraordinary beauty becomes her destruction, she had articulated something cinema rarely admits, that being impossibly beautiful can be its own kind of prison. She spoke 4 languages. I moved effortlessly between European art films and Hollywood blockbusters, and carried herself with a quiet dignity that the industry rarely affords to women who look like her. The 2002 film Irreversible pushed her into controversial territory that many actresses would have refused. She didn't flinch. Then came age, and instead of fearing it, she wore it like a second skin. At 50, she became the oldest Bond girl in history. In 2026, she remains a global face for Cartier, the living, breathing proof that real elegance has no expiration date. Michelle Pfeiffer. She arrived in Hollywood with a face that seemed sculpted for cinema, and almost no one knew what to do with her. Before the fame, before Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer had fallen into a dangerous cult that believed humans could survive on sunlight and air alone. She got out, and what she built afterward was extraordinary. In 1983, she played Elvira Hancock in Scarface, icy, bruised, unforgettable. Then came her breathtaking triple Oscar run, Dangerous Liaisons, The Fabulous Baker Boys, where she sang live, draped across a piano, and Love Field. She could do it all. What made her different wasn't just the beauty, it was the sharp, quiet intelligence underneath. She later passed on both Pretty Woman and Silence of the Lambs, roles that became cultural milestones for other women. Then, at the height of her powers, she simply stepped back to raise her children. She returned, eventually, joining the Marvel Universe, launching her own clean fragrance line, Henry Rose. In 2026, at 67, Michelle Pfeiffer is exactly where she always belonged, entirely on her own terms. Sharon Stone. There are very few moments in cinema history that stop time, but Sharon Stone's interrogation scene in Basic Instinct is one of them. In 1992, she didn't just play a character, she became a cultural earthquake, dangerous, magnetic, completely in control. Then came Casino in 1995, a raw, devastating performance that earned her a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination, proving she was far more than just a provocateur. With a verified IQ of 154 and a Mensa card to match, she was always smarter than the roles Hollywood offered her. And then, in 2001, at the very peak of everything, a massive brain hemorrhage nearly killed her. She had to relearn how to walk, how to talk. The industry quietly moved on without her. That kind of abandonment leaves a specific kind of mark. But Sharon Stone doesn't disappear quietly. She came back as a painter, a philanthropist, a fierce Am-Fayar activist. In 2026, bold on every red carpet, she no longer needs Hollywood's permission to matter. She's earned something far more valuable: survival. Nicole Kidman. She was the tall, red-haired Australian girl who arrived in Hollywood on the arm of Tom Cruise. And for a while, that's all anyone seemed to see. But Nicole Kidman had plans that went far beyond being anyone's wife. She started quietly, playing a race car doctor in Days of Thunder in 1990. Then, with To Die For in 1995, something shifted. She revealed a sharp, unsettling comedic darkness that absolutely no one expected. By the time she wore a prosthetic nose to play Virginia Woolf in The Hours, winning the Oscar in 2003, she had made it undeniable. She was chameleonic in a way very few actresses ever are. Her divorce from Tom Cruise in 2001 played out in global tabloids, Raw, public, painful. But she used it. She rebuilt. Today, Nicole Kidman doesn't just act. She produces, she selects, she controls the narrative entirely. In 2026, ruling prestige television with projects like Big Little Lies and The Perfect Couple, she is finally seen exactly as she always was, entirely, powerfully herself. Meg Ryan. There is a very specific kind of magic in Meg Ryan, the kind that makes you believe love is real, even when you're watching it from a dark theater completely alone. As Sally Albright in When Harry Met Sally in 1989, she didn't just deliver a performance. She delivered a feeling, that laugh, that perfectionism, that completely unguarded openness. Through Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, she became America's sweetheart, the woman every man wanted to meet and every woman wanted to befriend. But that image was fragile. In 2000, an affair with Russell Crowe detonated her carefully constructed public persona overnight. The tabloids were merciless. The sweet girl narrative shattered completely. She didn't fight it. She just stepped back, tired, burned out, and done with the machine. She returned years later to direct and star in the 2023 rom-com What Happens Later. In 2026, she lives quietly between New York and California, occasionally surfacing at film festivals. She traded the spotlight for something it never gave her: peace. Catherine Zeta-Jones. Before she was Morticia Addams, before Chicago, before any of it, Catherine Zeta-Jones was a little girl from Swansea, Wales, and tapping her feet on stages across Britain so brilliantly that she became the national tap dancing champion. That discipline never left her. When she exploded onto the global stage as Elena Montero in The Mask of Zorro in 1998, the fiery swordplay, the dancing, the sheer physical magnetism, she did every single bit of it herself. Trained since the age of 4, she wasn't just charming audiences, she was commanding them. Chicago in 2002 delivered her the Oscar. Traffic earned her deep critical respect. She seemed untouchable. But behind the glamour came harder years: intense tabloid scrutiny, a move across the ocean for a fresh start, and a deeply personal battle with bipolar II disorder that she faced with uncommon honesty and courage. That openness changed how people saw her. In 2026, reborn as Morticia Addams in the Netflix sensation Wednesday, she isn't just having a comeback, she's having a coronation. Jennifer Connelly. She was 12 years old, standing in a labyrinth, looking up at David Bowie, and the camera already knew she was something completely rare. Jennifer Connelly's debut in Labyrinth in 1986 didn't set the box office on fire, but it set hearts ablaze for an entire generation of fans who grew up rewinding that VHS until it wore thin. Hollywood wasn't quite sure what to do with her after that, so she did something unusual for a young actress. She walked away and went to Yale and Stanford to study English literature, quietly rebuilding herself on her own terms. When she returned as someone entirely transformed. Requiem for a Dream in 2000 was shattering, or A Beautiful Mind in 2001 won her the Oscar. That quiet, intense gaze, the one that could pin you to your seat, had found its full, devastating power. In 2026, she continues selecting roles with surgical precision. Top Gun, Maverick, the sci-fi series Dark Matter. No noise, no drama, just the work, just that extraordinary, unforgettable presence. Uma Thurman. Standing at 5'11", with a face that seemed borrowed from another era entirely, Uma Thurman was never going to fit neatly into any box Hollywood tried to build. She was the daughter of the first Western Tibetan Buddhist monk, raised partly in India, a childhood that gave her something no drama school can teach: genuine, untamable depth. But it was Quentin Tarantino who truly unveiled her. As Mia Wallace in Pulp Fiction in 1994, that black bob, bare feet, and a cigarette in hand, she became the defining image of 90s cool. A decade later, she bled and fought through Kill Bill as the bride, a performance of raw, almost mythological power. But behind the scenes, a stunt gone terribly wrong on that same set left her physically damaged for years, and a long, painful rift with Tarantino followed. She eventually spoke out publicly, sparking urgent conversations about on-set safety and power in Hollywood. In 2026, she appears in prestige television like Dexter, Resurrection, older, sharper, every scar now woven into what makes her so genuinely compelling. Winona Ryder. If you grew up in the late 80s or 90s, chances are Winona Ryder was your first glimpse of a girl who made being different feel like a genuine superpower. As Lydia Dietz in Beetlejuice in 1988, goth curls, deadpan delivery, gloriously unafraid of the weird, She was strange, poetic, and completely magnetic. She became the undisputed queen of Gen X cool, drifting through Edward Scissorhands, Heathers, and Little Women with an effortless emotional intelligence that her peers simply couldn't match. Then came 2001, not a creative failure, but something far more human. A shoplifting arrest that the tabloids transformed into a gleeful, relentless feeding frenzy. Hollywood quietly labeled her uninsurable. The work dried up almost overnight, but she waited, patient, dignified, determined. Then Stranger Things arrived in 2016 and handed her to an entirely new generation of fans who loved her just as fiercely. In 2026, with the final season now complete, Winona Ryder stands as something genuinely rare. An actress equally adored by every generation that ever discovered her. Phoebe Cates. Ask anyone who was a teenager in 1982 what scene they remember most, and 9 times out of 10, the answer involves a red bikini and a backyard pool. Phoebe Cates in Fast Times at Ridgemont High stopped the world for approximately 90 seconds and never quite let it start again for an entire generation of dreamers. But here's what most people forget. She was a supremely gifted ballerina, accepted to the School of American Ballet on scholarship until a devastating knee injury changed her path entirely. She pivoted to acting, became a global icon, starred in Gremlins, and was arguably the most recognizable face of the mid-80s. Then, in 1994, she did something that almost no star in Hollywood's history has ever willingly done. She simply stopped. She married Kevin Kline, raised her children, and opened a boutique gift shop in New York called Blue Tree. In 2026, she remains married to the same man, living quietly, happily. Proof that walking away from everything can sometimes be the bravest choice of all. Molly Ringwald. In 1984, a filmmaker named John Hughes looked at Molly Ringwald and saw every American teenager who ever felt invisible, embarrassed, and desperately hopeful, and he put her on screen. As Samantha Baker in 16 Candles and then Claire in The Breakfast Club, she became something more than an actress. She became a mirror. An entire generation saw themselves in her. The awkward longing, the searching, and the feeling of being on the edge of something but not quite there yet. She was the Brat Pack's beating heart. But the golden era was short-lived by design, not by failure. Tired of playing versions of the same girl, she moved to Paris in the 1990s, reinventing herself in French films far from the Hollywood machine that had made her famous. She came back eventually, older, far more layered, in character roles, Riverdale, and most recently Ryan Murphy's feud, Capote versus the Swans. In 2026, what most fans still don't know is that the girl who played the prom queen is also a classically trained jazz singer, just like her father, Ornella Muti. If Italy had a face in the 1980s, it was hers. Ornella Muti arrived in Hollywood as Princess Aura in Flash Gordon in 1980. All feline grace, smoldering eyes, and a screen presence that required absolutely no translation from any language. She had already spent a full decade becoming Italy's most beloved actress, moving between gritty neo-realism and high-fashion glamour with a rare fluency that no contemporary quite matched. In Europe, she was untouchable. In Hollywood, she was electric, but life off-screen was never without its storms. In 2015, she received a suspended prison sentence for skipping a theatrical performance, claiming illness, while being photographed at a dinner with Vladimir Putin. The story became international headlines overnight. In more recent years, she expressed a desire to honor her mother's Russian heritage by seeking citizenship, a statement that reignited enormous controversy. And yet, at 71, Ornella Muti remains a figure of extraordinary, timeless beauty, still active, still outspoken, and still entirely, magnificently herself. Some flames simply refuse to dim. Rachel Ward. She looked like she'd been painted for a different century. That refined English beauty, those searching, melancholic eyes. And when she appeared as Maggie Cleary in The Thornbirds in 1983, the entire world held its breath. The miniseries became a cultural phenomenon, and Rachel Ward became the definitive romantic ideal of the decade. Against All Odds followed, cementing her as one of Hollywood's most sought-after faces. But something about the machine never quite fit her. She felt displaced in the spotlight, too intelligent for the roles being offered, too self-aware to convincingly pretend otherwise. So when Brian Brown asked her to build a life in Australia, she said yes without hesitation. She swapped red carpets for red dirt, movie sets for cattle fields in New South Wales. In 2023, she released Rachel's Farm, a documentary about her transformation from global icon to regenerative farmer. And in 2026, a video of her celebrating aging naturally went quietly viral. Her message beautifully simple: do not fear aging. Hollywood's loss became the land's remarkable, extraordinary gain. Isabelle Adjani. At just 20 years old, Isabelle Adjani earned an Oscar nomination, the youngest Best Actress nominee in history at the time. The role was Adele Hugo in 1975, and she played it with an obsessive, soul-bearing intensity that left François Truffaut simply awed. He once said her face alone could tell a story without a plot. Over the next 2 decades, she built one of the most decorated careers in French cinema. 5 César Awards, roles in Possession and Queen Margot that remain benchmarks of fearless, committed acting. But her life was never without shadow. In 1987, a vicious and bizarre rumor spread across France that she had died of AIDS, forcing her to appear live on television just to prove she was alive. Then, in 2023, she received a suspended prison sentence for tax fraud, a stark fall from grace for a woman once considered entirely untouchable. In 2026, she remains a presence at Paris Fashion Week and continues to perform. The legend may be complicated, but it is absolutely, permanently undeniable. Madeleine Stowe. She possessed a kind of stillness that most actresses spend their entire careers desperately trying to find. Madeleine Stowe walked into The Last of the Mohicans in 1992, opposite Daniel Day-Lewis no less, and held the screen with a grace so serene and so quietly steely, it took your breath away completely. Unlawful entry in 12 Monkeys. She moved through the decade with an authority that felt almost classical, almost out of time. But then, without warning and without scandal, she simply chose a different life. In 1996, she walked away from Hollywood to raise her daughter on a Texas ranch. No breakdown, no tabloid drama, just a woman deciding that motherhood mattered more than marquees. She resurfaced years later in Revenge, playing a gloriously complex villain, reminding everyone exactly what they had been missing. Now, in 2026, she is preparing for a major return in HBO's highly anticipated It, Welcome to Derry. The wait seems finally over. Some silences, it turns out, are just very long, very deliberate pauses before the next extraordinary entrance. Rebecca de Mornay. She was Tom Cruise's co-star before Tom Cruise was Tom Cruise. In Risky Business in 1983, so Rebecca de Mornay played Lana, sophisticated, seductive, calculating, and brought a complexity to the role that could have so easily been one-dimensional. The camera loved her. Audiences were transfixed. Then came 1992's The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, one of the most chilling villainous performances of the entire decade. She was terrifying in the most elegant possible way, but that success came with an invisible ceiling. Hollywood began typecasting her as the dangerous blonde, the predatory woman, and the richly layered actress behind those characters found fewer and fewer doors open to her. What most people never knew is that off-screen, she was a genuine creative force. She co-produced Leonard Cohen's legendary 1992 album The Future during their relationship, work that endures far beyond most of her films. In 2026, she continues working in television and character roles, a talent that Hollywood perhaps never fully deserved and certainly never fully appreciated while it had the chance. Brooke Shields. She was 14 years old on the cover of Vogue, 14, and the world couldn't look away. Brooke Shields didn't just arrive in Hollywood. She arrived as a cultural event, a controversy, a debate about beauty and childhood that the 1980s wasn't remotely equipped to have. The Blue Lagoon in 1980 made her the most famous face on the planet while simultaneously sparking a firestorm about exploitation that still hasn't fully quieted. Calvin Klein chose her to sell jeans to an entire generation. She became the eyebrow, the look, the aesthetic standard of a decade. But the woman behind the icon was fighting her own battles quietly. In severe postpartum depression after the birth of her first child was a darkness she absolutely refused to hide. She wrote about it with unflinching honesty in her memoir, Down Came the Rain. In 2026, she runs Beginning Is Now, a wellness platform for women over 40, and continues acting in films like Mother of the Bride, still radiant, still real, and still completely, defiantly undimmed. Elisabeth Shue. She was the girl next door, the kind your parents loved and your friends envied. And in The Karate Kid in 1984, Elisabeth Shue made that girl feel genuinely warm, real, and worth rooting for. But underneath that sunny exterior was someone who had no intention of staying comfortable. When the offers kept coming for similar roles, she did something almost unheard of for an actress at the peak of her popularity. She put her career on hold to finish her degree in political science at Harvard University. She came back with something to prove. Leaving Las Vegas in 1995 was the proof. Playing Sarah, a hardened woman navigating a man's self-destruction, she earned an Academy Award nomination and left absolutely no one in doubt about the depth of her range. The transformation was total and complete. In 2026, she continues working prolifically. Cobra Kai, The Boys, bringing that same rare combination of warmth and steel to every role she touches. Harvard and Hollywood, it turns out, were never as different as they seemed. Kelly LeBrock. She literally gave the world the phrase, "Don't hate me because I'm beautiful." And for a brief, dazzling moment in 1985, the whole world had to decide whether it would. In Weird Science, Kelly LeBrock played Lisa, the ultimate fantasy woman summoned to life, and she did it with a combination of unearthly beauty and sharp, self-aware comic timing that should have launched a truly legendary career. The Woman in Red had already come first, cementing her as the most desired face in Hollywood. But then, the door swung closed, not from lack of talent, but from a deeply difficult marriage to Steven Seagal that consumed nearly a decade of her life entirely. She left the industry, retreating to the Santa Ynez Mountains to raise her children off-grid, away from every camera and every lens. In 2026, she lives quietly on her ranch, occasionally appearing at nostalgia conventions, and has recently shared her story in an autobiography about surviving the industry and finding herself whole on the other side. Nastassja Kinski. There is a photograph, shot by Richard Avedon, of a young woman lying naked, a live python coiled deliberately around her body. It became one of the most iconic images of the entire 20th century. That was Nastassja Kinski. Born to chaos, the daughter of the volatile and deeply controversial actor Klaus Kinski, she seemed almost fated for extraordinary intensity. At just 17, she starred in Roman Polanski's Tess, a film that won multiple Oscars and turned her into an international art house sensation practically overnight. She spoke 5 languages. She moved between continents, cultures, and collaborators, working with Wim Wenders on the haunting Paris, Texas, creating something almost otherworldly. But her personal story was always shadowed by her turbulent relationship with her father, by the weight of a beauty so extreme it frequently eclipsed the actress underneath. In 2026, she works in European cinema and serves on juries at prestigious festivals like Cannes, a living relic of a bolder, more complicated, more dangerously alive era of filmmaking. Emmanuelle Béart. In 1986, a barefoot shepherdess walked onto French cinema screens seeking revenge, and the world discovered Emmanuelle Béart. Manon des Sources made her the face of a generation, wild, natural, luminous without a single trace of artifice. She was everything glamour pretended to be but rarely was. A decade later, she crossed into Hollywood in Mission Impossible alongside Tom Cruise and held her own with complete authority. But it was a personal decision, made far from any camera, that would define her legacy most powerfully. In the early 2000s, a cosmetic procedure on her lips went wrong, and instead of hiding it, she did the opposite. She spoke about it openly and became one of the earliest, most influential voices against the relentless pressure on women to alter themselves. The irony of the woman once called France's most beautiful face, leading that campaign was lost on absolutely no one. In 2026, she works as a UNICEF ambassador and continues performing in French theater and independent cinema. Her beauty now entirely, beautifully beside the point.